Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Depictions Media Radio, and in this next couple segments we're going to hear from the press secretary from the White House and also a meeting that President Biden had with the Prime Minister of India about relations between the United States and India and ongoing things that are happening around the world that both countries are deeply involved with, such as Ukraine and also getting Indian students out of the Ukraine safely without injury and delivering them home to their families. So let's listen to what is actually said about that and gun violence in the United States and how they also plan to try to curb excess violence with the police in eliminating things like chokeholds and other methods that have ended people's lives instead of them being arrested and then being brought to a court system for justice where they could be found either innocent or guilty instead of being eliminated on the streets by the hands of a police officer.
White House last September to discuss U.S.-Indian relations, to meet with our fellow Quad leaders, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you today virtually and with your two ministers and your ambassador here in person. Is it contemporaneous? Oh, I'm sorry. There's two vibrant democracies who one is learning how to make sure I can do this contemporaneously. But two vibrant democracies. We take the same concerns about the global challenges we face with COVID-19, advancing health security and tracking the climate crisis, and we share a strong and growing major defense partnership. At the root of our partnership is a deep connection between our people, ties of family, of friendship, and of shared values. On that note, I want to welcome India's humanitarian support for the people of Ukraine, who are suffering a horrific assault, including a tragic shelling on a train station last week that killed dozens of innocent children and women and civilians attempting to flee the violence. The United States and India are going to continue our close consultation on how to manage the destabilizing effects of this Russian war. And I'm looking forward to our discussions today, Mr. Prime Minister. Our continued consultation and dialogue are key to ensuring the U.S.-Indian relationship continues to grow deeper and stronger, delivering our people and our global good that we all are seeking to manage, particularly in your part of the world. And the floor is yours, Mr. Prime Minister.
President Biden, I would like to first of all express my gratitude to you for your warm words. Our defense and foreign ministers will be meeting today in the 2+2 format in a short while from now. Our meeting before that is very important as it will provide direction for their discussions. I also appreciate your initiative to organize today's virtual meeting. Excellency, when I was in Washington last year in September, and you in fact mentioned that, you had said at the time that the India-America partnership can contribute to solving a lot of global problems. I totally agree with you. As two democracies that are the world's largest and oldest, we are natural partners. And the progress that has taken place in our relations in the last few years, the new momentum that has been created, would have been hard to even imagine a few decades ago. Excellency, our talks today are taking place at a time when the situation in Ukraine is very worrying. A few weeks ago, over 20,000 Indians were stuck in Ukraine, and most of them were young students. After a lot of hard work, we were successful in getting them all out safely. One student, however, lost his life. During this entire process, I spoke several times on the phone to the presidents of both Ukraine and Russia. I not only appealed for peace, but also suggested that there be direct talks between President Putin and the president of Ukraine. We had extensive discussions on Ukraine in our parliament as well. Recently, the news about the killings of innocent civilians in the Bucha city was very worrying. We instantly condemned the killings and have called for an independent inquiry. We hope that the ongoing discussions between Russia and Ukraine will lead to peace. Excellency, we have also emphasized the importance of the security of civilians in Ukraine and the unhindered supply of humanitarian assistance to them. And you mentioned this, in fact. On our part, we have sent medicines and other relief material to Ukraine and to its neighboring countries. And on Ukraine's request, we will be sending them another consignment of medicines very soon. Excellency, at the beginning of your term in office, you had used a very important slogan, democracies can deliver. The India-America partnership and the success of the India-America partnership is the best means to make this slogan meaningful. This year, India is celebrating 75 years of its independence, and we are also celebrating the 75th anniversary of our diplomatic relations as well. I am confident that our friendship with America will be an integral part of India's development journey over the next 25 years. Once again, my thanks to you for organizing this event.
Please have a seat. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. President Joe Biden, members of Congress, members of our administration, friends, and fellow Americans. When gunfire rings out in a community, it brings fear and it brings pain to the victims, to those who love them, to the parents, who tell their children to run into the bathtub when they hear gunfire on the street outside, because it is the safest place in the home from a stray bullet. Gun violence brings pain to the entire community, and by extension, to the whole of society. As a prosecutor, I brought many perpetrators of gun violence to justice, but I knew, even after a successful prosecution, the hurt and the loss and the fear often still remained. To the survivors of gun violence who are here with us today, and to the friends and family members of those we have lost, I thank you for your incredible determination in the face of so much pain. And it is a deep honor to stand with you today. As we know all too well, our nation continues to be plagued by an epidemic of gun violence. The President has worked for decades to end this terror. For my whole career, addressing gun violence has been one of my top priorities, first as a courtroom prosecutor, then as the elected district attorney of San Francisco when we created a gun specialist unit to go after violent offenders, then as Attorney General of California, where we worked within our California Bureau of Firearms to investigate and seize firearms for those who unlawfully possess them. I have seen firsthand how our nation's epidemic of gun violence has been driven by the proliferation of guns in our communities, and increasingly in recent years by the proliferation of ghost guns. Ghost guns can be purchased on the internet and assembled at a kitchen table. They can be bought without a background check by people who otherwise would be legally prohibited from gun ownership: domestic abusers, gun traffickers, individuals convicted of violent crimes, and even young children. Traditional guns are required to have serial numbers, which can help law enforcement identify a firearm that has been stolen from its lawful owner or found at the scene of a crime. Ghost guns have no serial numbers. They are practically untraceable, making it more difficult for law enforcement to hold to account those who use weapons to do violence. Because of how easy they are to access and how difficult they are to trace, ghost guns pose an especially grave threat to the safety of our communities. That is why, as a United States Senator, I was proud to co-sponsor a bill to manufacture and end the manufacturing, of sale of ghost guns. And it is why we are here today, to announce new actions to get ghost guns off our streets and to protect our communities from gun violence. The Department of Justice plays a critical role in addressing gun violence in our communities, and the actions we are taking today would not be possible without their partnership. So I'm proud to now welcome a leader who has spearheaded much of the department's work on this important issue, Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, Mr. President, Mia. There is no higher priority for the Department of Justice than keeping the American people safe. That is why every day we work with our community and law enforcement partners to combat violent crime through prevention and through prosecutions. Too often, though, murders and other serious crimes are committed with guns. Each victim of gun violence is someone's loved one, a neighbor, a friend. We stand together today in recognition of that loss and alongside all of those who have been touched by the tragedy of gun violence. We also stand together with resolve and with hope for the future. Just over 1 year ago, the President, the Vice President, and the Attorney General stood in this very spot to announce new steps to curb gun violence. One such critical step is reining in so-called ghost guns. These are guns that have no serial numbers. They are nearly impossible for law enforcement to trace. Many are sold without a background check. They're accessible to almost anyone. They often come in kits. They can be bought online. They can be assembled quickly with little or no training. That means that someone can convert parts in a box into a working gun with alarming ease. Now, we call them ghost guns because they can't be traced. But make no mistake, they are real. They can shoot to kill, and they do. For years, criminals have sought out these unmarked guns to murder and to maim. That's why the Attorney General has signed a rule that updates our regulations to keep up with changes in technology. The goal? To keep untraceable guns off of the streets, out of the hands of criminals and others who are prohibited by law from possessing a firearm. Some of the key changes include updating old definitions to ensure that gun laws apply to all firearms, including ghost guns, requiring gun dealers to run background checks on kits containing parts that can readily be converted into a gun, facilitating tracing by requiring firearms dealers to apply serial numbers to existing ghost guns so that they then take into inventory. Because of these updates, law enforcement will have additional crime gun intelligence to stop gun violence, to seek justice for victims of violent crimes, and to get guns used in crimes off of our streets. Today's announcement is one of many efforts by the Department of Justice to protect our communities from violent crime and gun violence. We continue to go after and disrupt illegal gun trafficking networks. We continue to go after and hold accountable the most violent offenders. And we are working every day with our partners in law enforcement and with community leaders to craft specific strategies to combat violent crime and keep communities safe. We will not stop until we reduce violent crime and save lives. As the Attorney General has said, the department will continue to apply every single tool at our disposal to fulfill that obligation. And now it is my great honor to introduce Mia Tretta, an inspiring young woman whose story illustrates why we're here today and why these actions are so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Attorney General. Good afternoon. As she said, my name is Mia Tretta, and it's an honor to be here today. And not just because it's the White House, but because I'm speaking on behalf of two classmates who can't be here with us, one of whom was my best friend. When I woke up on November 14th, 2019, my biggest worry of the day was a Spanish test. I was a freshman at Saugus High School in Santa Clarita, California, determined to get good grades. So as soon as I got to school, I made a beeline for the quad to meet up with my best friend, Dominic Blackwell. It's hard for me to talk about Dominic. Like me, Dominic had big dreams, liked doing well in school and planning for our futures. We spent the morning like any other, laughing and talking, until we heard a loud pop. It was a gunshot, followed by 6 more. One of the bullets hit me in the stomach. Somehow, I was able to get up and run away, but Dominic couldn't. I was airlifted to the hospital and spent hours in surgery having a bullet removed from my abdomen that was millimeters away from my major artery. Then my parents told me the terrible truth. Dominic had died, and so had another classmate, Gracie Ann Muehlberger, a 15-year-old girl with an infectious laugh. And a community was left shattered. I later learned that we had been shot by a 16-year-old student for reasons I will never know. He had brought his father's weapon to school, a firearm I would come to know as a ghost gun. Ghost guns are untraceable, build-it-yourself firearms that look like a gun, shoot like a gun, and kill like a gun, but have not been regulated like a gun. I've also learned that as a student, I don't just have to worry about Spanish tests, but about my life. School shootings with ghost guns are on the rise. And the most lasting thing I have learned, other than the loss of friends or the shattering of my youth, is that nothing has relieved the pain in my heart like working to prevent more senseless shootings. So my family and I joined Everytown for Gun Safety, Moms Demand Action, and Students Demand Action. And we worked with thousands of other young activists and survivors to prevent more things like this happening. They turned my pain into progress. And that's why we're here today, celebrating progress, life-saving progress. Because now, finally, we have a president who realizes that thoughts and prayers alone are not enough. A president who has been standing up to the gun lobby for decades and winning. A president who has been standing up for survivors like me and so many others. A president who is taking bold, meaningful action to stop the spread of ghost guns. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor to introduce the strongest gun sense commander-in-chief ever to hold office, President Joe Biden.
Wow. Thank you, Madam Vice President, Deputy Attorney General Monaco. And Mia, you're an incredible young woman. We spoke for a moment inside the Oval Office, and a lot of people here who have lost someone, and too many here have lost someone, know that no matter what the occasion, how celebratory or not it is, when you have to repeat it, you relive it like it just happened a moment ago. Your poise, your confidence, and your intellect are really impressive, honey. I mean, they really are. And you know, I think most people here can tell you've gone through serious loss, that the best way to deal with it is find purpose. And you found real purpose. And you are impressive. And thank you for sharing your strength, for helping us remember your friend Dominic Blackwell and Gracie Muehlberger. You know, Dominic and Gracie's parents are with us today. Are you prepared to stand up? If I don't want to embarrass you, but would you stand up? If you have a moment afterwards, maybe you can come in the Oval with me if you wouldn't mind. I'd love to talk to you. Frank and Nancy, Brian and Cindy, everyone here, as they say, feels your pain a little bit, particularly if they've suffered a serious loss. You've now joined a terrible fellowship of loss that many people have experienced. There are too many survivors and advocates here for me to name everyone today, but let me say the loss in this crowd is incalculable. But so is the strength. So is the strength. I believe our nation will be safer for your bravery, and I really mean that. Survivors like me and Manny and Claudia, Los Angeles Deputy Sheriff who survived an ambush by a shooter with a ghost gun, represent individuals and families all across this country whose lives have been forever changed by a ghost gun. Some made national headlines, many others did not. Today we honor your strength and your action. A year ago this week, standing here with many of you, I instructed the Attorney General to write a regulation that would rein in the proliferation of ghost guns because I was having trouble getting anything passed in the Congress. But I used what we call regulatory authority. A year later, we're here, we keep that promise. The gun lobby tried to tie up the regulators in paperwork for a long, long time. The NRA called this rule I'm about to announce extreme. Extreme. But let me ask you, is it extreme to protect police officers? Extreme to protect our children? Extreme to keep guns out of the hands of people who couldn't even pass a background check? Look, the idea that someone on the terrorist list could purchase one of these guns is extreme. It isn't extreme, just basic common sense. You know, if you buy a couch you have to assemble, it's still a couch. If you order a package like this one over here that includes the parts you need, the direction of assembling a functioning firearm, you bought a gun. Take a look. Take a look at this. It comes in this package. You can see the picture down here maybe. This is the gun. It's not hard to put together. A little drill, hand drill at home. Doesn't take very long. Anyone can order it in the mail. Anyone. And folks, a felon, a terrorist, a domestic abuser can go from a gun kit to a gun in as little as 30 minutes. Buyers aren't required to pass background checks because guns have no serial numbers, these guns. When they show up at a crime scene, they can't be traced. Harder to find and prove who used them. Meaning you can't connect the gun to the shooter and hold them accountable. In fact, the ATF reports that they've been able to trace less than 1% of ghost guns reported by law enforcement. And so it makes sense that police across the country are increasingly finding ghost guns at crime scenes. And by the way, ghost guns can be, quote, rifles, essentially assault weapons as well. This is just one version of the kit you can buy. Last year alone, law enforcement reported approximately 20,000 suspected ghost guns to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. That's a 10-fold increase in these ghost guns from 2016. 10-fold in 5 years. These guns are weapons of choice for many criminals. We're going to do everything we can to deprive them of that choice. And when we find them, put them in jail for a long, long time. Law enforcement is sounding the alarm. Our communities are paying the price, and we're acting. Today, the United States Department of Justice is making it illegal for a business to manufacture one of these kits without a serial number. Illegal. Illegal for a licensed gun dealer to sell them without a background check. And starting today, weapons like the one used in Saugus High School and to ambush deputies with us that are here with us today are being treated like the deadly firearms they are. And if somebody sells the ghost gun to a federally licensed dealer, for example, a pawn shop, that dealer must make the firearm and mark it with a serial number before reselling it. All of a sudden, it's no longer a ghost. It has a return address. It's going to help save lives, reduce crime, and get more criminals off the streets. And this rule is only part of our strategy to go after ghost guns. In February, the Department of Justice launched a national ghost gun enforcement initiative, intensifying our efforts to bring cases against those who use ghost guns illegally. We're teaching investigators and prosecutors best practices, how to build these cases, and assigning a coordinator in each of the ATF field divisions to serve as a point person for helping federal, state, and local law enforcement go after ghost guns. If you commit a crime with a ghost gun, expect federal prosecution. Not just state, expect federal prosecution. This rule is an important step. It's going to make a difference, I promise you. And there are a lot of other things we know work to reduce gun violence and other violent crimes and save lives. That's why I put together a comprehensive strategy to supercharge what works while continuing to push Congress to act on sensible legislation to prevent gun violence. In addition to today's rule, we're working on 4 areas. First, we're going after rogue gun dealers. The last time we had data on this was more than 20 years ago. 5% of gun dealers sold 90% of illegal guns found at crime scenes. 5% sold 90%. These merchants of death are breaking the law for profit, selling guns that are killing innocent people. We're cracking down on these gun dealers and the violent criminals they knowingly arm. Second, we're disrupting illegal gun trafficking. Attorney General Garland has directed all U.S. attorneys to prioritize combating gun trafficking that is moving guns across state lines and city boundaries. The Justice Department is surging prosecutorial resources to help shut down these trafficking corridors, including the one known as the Iron Pipeline that funnels weapons from gun shops in states like Georgia to crime scenes up and down the East Coast. Thirdly, we're funding strategies we know reduce gun crime, community policing, and community violence interruption. Look, I've said it many times. The answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police and give them the tools and training to support they need to be better partners and protectors of our communities in need. And I've already made clear that I want cities, states, counties, and tribes to use some of the $350 billion we sent to them in the American Rescue Plan that I wrote in the first month to reduce gun violence, hire police officers for community policing, pay police overtime, purchase crime-fighting technologies. They were given the money, they can do it. Spend it. And now, on top of that, I'm calling for additional funding to put police on the streets for community policing. One thing we learned in the middle of the crime wave not long ago, when the cop knows by first name who owns the corner drugstore, who lives in the apartment above 6B, who the people who are the pastors of the churches, guess what? People talk to them. They trust them. My son was the Attorney General in Delaware. He'd go around and make sure everybody literally in these high crime rate neighborhoods, he'd give them his personal cell phone number and instructed all the cops to do the same thing. And they did. And the crime plummeted. Not a joke. Look at the record. Not just my son, but all across the nation. And for the AFT to hire agents, they need to help to fight gun crime. More agents. My budget funds body cameras, make sure police work with our local communities and are accountable to the local communities. We're also investing in community violence intervention. These are areas of local programs that utilize trusted messengers, community members, and leaders to work directly with people who are the most likely to commit a gun crime or become victims of gun crime. Get to them early. It works. It works. They intervene before it's too late. Fourth, we're funding jobs and training for young people, summer programs, drug treatment, mental health, housing availability, criminal justice reform, and reentry support for people coming home after incarceration. Right now, you get let out of prison after serving your time, you get a bus ticket and $25. You end up under the same bridge you left 2, 5, 10 years earlier. If you serve your time, you qualify for Pell Grants, you qualify for housing, you qualify for food, you qualify to get back into the community, give them a fighting chance. These are all demonstrated ways to reduce crime. And I'm strongly urging cities, states, counties, and tribes to use the rescue plan funding we sent them to do more in each of these areas. And they need to do more and do it quickly before the summer, when crime typically surges around America. So, we're pushing in each of these areas, but none of this absolves Congress, with all due respect to my members of Congress here, they're the wrong people I'd be talking to, for the responsibility to act. We need Congress to pass universal background checks. Universal background checks. And I know it's controversial, but I got it done once. Ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. I was getting criticized when I first passed this law when I was a senator. And guess what? I was down in southern Delaware, do a lot of hunting and fishing down there. And I was walking up one of the creek beds. And the guy standing there said, "You want to take my gun?" I said, "I don't take your gun." He said, "Well, you're telling me I can't have more than the next number of bullets in my gun." And I said, "What do you think, the deer you're hunting or wear Kevlar vests? What the hell you need 20 bullets for? You must be a hell of a terrible shot." I'm serious. Think about it. Think about the mass shootings. As many as 100 rounds. It's a weapon of war. There's nothing to do with recreation. Outright ban of the sale and possession of unserialized guns. Eliminate gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. They're the only outfit. They're the only outfit in the country that is immune. Imagine had the tobacco industry been immune to being sued. Come on. In February, the families of 9 of the Sandy Hook shooting victims achieved a settlement against the maker of guns that was used to kill their children. The Sandy Hook folks are here. Are you embarrassed to ask you to stand up? These folks right here did more to keep all this going than anybody. We owe you, man. We owe you. It never goes away, does it? God love you. Look, this is incredibly rare because gun manufacturers have more immunity from liability than any other American industry. So they've never had to take responsibility for the death and destruction their products cause. But as part of this settlement, Remington agreed to release thousands of pages of internal documents. You did that. And here's why it's so important. Remember, it wasn't until we saw the internal documents that we really understood what cigarette manufacturers are doing to our kids and our families. Now, we may begin to see what gun manufacturers are and are not doing when it comes to making and marketing their deadly products. And by the way, it's going to sound bizarre. I support the Second Amendment. You have a right. But from the very beginning, the Second Amendment didn't say you can own any gun you want, as big as you want. You couldn't buy a cannon when, in fact, the Second Amendment passed. And certain people from the very beginning weren't allowed to purchase guns. It's nothing new. It's just rational. Look, this should be just a start. We need to repeal the liability shield of gun manufacturers and finally hold them accountable for false advertising and many other things they do. There's one more action I'm taking today. There's only been one Senate who's confirmed the Director of Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in the Bureau's entire history. It used to be didn't require Senate action when I first got to the Senate. But it's only been one since it became required confirmation. This is an agency whose mission is to protect communities from violent criminals, illegal trafficking of firearms, acts of arson and bombing, and a lot more. The mission of this agency isn't controversial, it's public safety. Today, to lead and support the dedicated men and women of the AFT, I'm proud to nominate Steve Dettelbach. Excuse me, I mispronounced your name. as Director of Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Steve is immensely qualified. He served the Department of Justice for 2 decades. He worked side by side to support the work of federal, state, and local law enforcement, including AFT agents. And one of those was his case he was personally tried as a U.S. attorney, where the serial arsonist firebombed the courthouses and police headquarters in Mansfield, Ohio. For his work, Steve got death threats, but the defendant got 60 years. Steve also partnered with the community leaders and law enforcement to help prevent violent crime. He's worked with the police to combat domestic extremism and to take violent criminals off the street. Steve's record makes him ready on day one to lead this agency. And by the way, in 2009, the U.S. Senate unanimously confirmed him to serve as U.S. Attorney. I look forward to working with the Senate to get him confirmed once again. With what I know about him and why I'm so enthusiastic about supporting him, I'd like to introduce my nominee to lead the AFT to you, all of you. Steve, come on up here. I'll just take this off. Thank you, buddy. I'm just going to stand over here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Vice President Harris, for your leadership in protecting the people of this nation and for placing your trust in me to become the next director of the ATF. Thanks. Thank you also, Deputy Attorney General Monaco, for all that you and Attorney General Garland continue to do at DOJ to make our nation safer. And thank you, Mia, for your incredible inspiration and courage, not just here today, but all over this nation. Thank you. I also want to thank my incredible, supportive, and often patient family who are here. My wonderful wife, Carol, and my children, Allie and David, please.
He's 16 years old, and I'm going to draft him.
Is there an agent in the house? But seriously, most especially today, I want to thank the men and women of the ATF. You know, I started as a career prosecutor back in 1992, and I have spent 3 decades watching and admiring agents and staff at the ATF, along with its federal, state, and local law enforcement partners as they work tirelessly and courageously to protect the American people. I would also say they work in anonymity, but that would not be completely true. Because sadly, one thing I've also seen over the years is that the ATF often does work in anonymity when its agents are out there risking their lives to protect us, only to be thrust into the public eye when it's time for criticism. You know, law enforcement is a very tough job, and no person and no agency is perfect. But the President is right. The men and women of the ATF and the public that they protect deserve better support from us. I've seen firsthand the work that so many at the ATF do to protect us from violence. They're dedicated, they're professional, and they're effective. They don't write the laws. Their mission every day is just to go out and enforce those laws and protect the public from a wide range of threats. When I was U.S. Attorney, our office partnered with the ATF and the Cleveland Police as they doggedly investigated and brought a case involving the deadliest home arson in Cleveland history, killed 9 people, including 8 kids. I also saw the ATF partner with the FBI and our office, first to find and then to bring to justice a bigot who drove from Indiana to outside Toledo to torch the largest mosque in Ohio. And last, and certainly not least, I have partnered with the ATF for decades in its crucial fight against gun violence. whether it was taking a single violent recidivist off the street in Maryland or putting together a big racketeering case against a violent gang in Youngstown, Ohio. I have seen the ATF work with other law enforcement to make so many of our communities safer. As we emerge from this pandemic, we've got to recognize that many Americans still face fear and isolation, not because of a virus, but because of an epidemic of firearms violence. It's not a new problem, and it has many causes. That's why it's going to take an all-hands-on-deck partnership approach to address that issue. And the ATF will be there.
For all of you at the top, we tried to wait until after the backgrounder on the India bylaw as well, so hopefully you were able to listen in on that. Today, as part of the fight to help Americans deal with high costs, the Vice President is announcing new actions to protect consumers and lessen the burden of medical debt on American families. She'll be joined by administration leaders, including HHS Secretary Becerra, CFPB Director Chopra, and OMB Director Young. Medical debt is now the largest source of debt in collections, more than credit cards, utilities, and auto loans combined. But it is not just a financial issue. It can have negative health effects too. Studies have found that Americans with medical debt are more likely to avoid seeking additional medical care than those without debt. Getting sick or taking care of loved ones should not mean financial hardship for American families. That is why the administration is going to hold medical providers and debt collectors accountable for harmful practices, reduce the role that medical debt plays in determining whether Americans can access credit, help over 500,000 of low-income American veterans get their medical debt forgiven, and inform consumers of their rights. These actions come on the heels of the President's April 5th executive order on access to affordable, quality health care coverage. Also wanted to note that today our administration launched a rural infrastructure tour to double down on the President's unwavering commitment to building a better America where rural communities thrive. The White House released a rural playbook to help state, local, tribal, and territorial governments in rural areas unlock the historic investments from the President's bipartisan infrastructure law. This playbook offers a what, when, where, and how to apply for funding under the law, making it easier for rural communities to plan and compete for federal resources that create good-paying jobs and generate economic opportunities. Secretary Haaland is kicking off the tour in Boulder County, Colorado today, and during the month of April, cabinet members and Biden administration officials will travel to dozens of rural communities to talk about how we are unlocking bipartisan infrastructure law investments and federal resources to make sure they reach rural areas across America. This tour includes the President's trip tomorrow to Menlo, Iowa, outside of Des Moines, to discuss the administration's actions to lower costs for working families. There, President Biden will make an announcement on actions to reduce the impact of Putin's price hike and build a better America with investments in rural communities from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And welcome back, Corinne. Her first day back. We're very thrilled to have her back here with us in the briefing room. Okay, with that.
I've got three things, hopefully, pretty quickly. As you just mentioned, the President's going to Iowa as part of the Rural Playbook launch. He's visiting a state that he lost during the 2020 campaign, and he's going to a county that was even more voting Republican last time. I'm wondering if that will make it harder for that area to receive his message politically.
Well, I think the President is not making this trip through a political prism. He's making this trip because Iowa is a rural state in the country that would benefit greatly from the President's policies, including the policies that he'll be talking about tomorrow on his trip. When he was running, I think many of you heard him say and convey he wanted to be the president for all people, whether you voted for him or not. And this is certainly an example of his effort to do exactly that.
On another topic, looking at the bilateral, how much did the President push the Prime Minister to limit Russian energy imports and arms, and what was the response?
Well, we'll let the Indian government project their response, or not their response, but their readout of the call. I would say that energy imports are not banned. They don't violate our sanctions. We certainly recognize every country is going to take steps that are in their interest. At the same time, on this call, what the president did is consistent with what our Deputy National Security Advisor, of course, did during his visit just a few weeks ago, was to make clear what the impact, of course, of our sanctions would be. We expect everybody to abide by those. And while India only imports about 1% to 2% of its energy from Russia, we also made clear, and the president made clear, that we would be happy to help them in diversifying this as well. In terms of and we also made clear, I should say, that the president also made clear that he does not believe it's in India's interest to accelerate or increase imports of Russian energy and other commodities as well, which is something we certainly convey to other countries. In terms of military actions, we have not made a decision about the waiver under CAATSA. In terms of how much it was discussed during the call, I'd have to get more details from our national security team on that specifically. Go ahead.
Jen, on the new rule today, this is already facing the threat of legal challenges from some gun groups. Given those threats, are you bracing for legal challenge, and when do you realistically expect to see this new rule take effect, given those challenges?
Well, let me first say that this rule, or the intention to put this rule forward, was announced, as you know, some time ago, and there was a lot of response to it, 250,000 comments, which is, of course, a lot to go through. What this is a reflection of, and why the president is, of course, confident or hopeful about our ability to ensure we can continue to implement it, is the fact that ghost guns kill people too. Ghost guns can be purchased online. People put together these kits. There are not background checks that are required. They're not under the same, they're not also required to have serial numbers, which makes it more difficult for law enforcement to track when these have an impact in crimes. So, of course, the president is confident in any executive order and the legal authority that he puts forward. But what's important to note about the announcement he is making today is that this is a rule that is supported by law enforcement. It is a rule that will help address what we know is a rising component of gun crimes across the country, which is the use of ghost guns. And to the president, it was important to take a step to address that.
Going off of what you just said, please tell us that these guns are as simple as clicking on the internet and snapping parts together. Will there be, can you say, this administration say there will be fewer shootings as a result of what the president is doing today?
Well, that's always our hope and our objective, right, is to reduce the impact of gun violence. As we've seen violence go up, we have seen a huge, vast majority of that, nearly 3/4, as a result of guns. And ghost guns, as you said, Cecilia, are used by simply clicking and ordering online, ordering a kit that people can make in their homes. And that is one of the reasons why this action or efforts to take more steps has been supported by a range of law enforcement officials. From the International Association of Chiefs of Police said that ghost guns are, quote, increasingly used by criminals and terrorists. We saw Governor Larry Hogan, of course a Republican, as you know, call Maryland's bill banning ghost guns a, quote, positive step as we seek to stem the tide of violent crime. Brown County, Wisconsin Lieutenant Matt Ronk said ghost guns are, quote, a new threat. And there are a range of police leaders and officials across the country who have conveyed how important both these components that the president is announcing today are to addressing the threat of ghost guns.
Hey, Jim, just to follow up, did the president get a commitment from Prime Minister Modi not to accelerate or increase imports of Russian energy?
I'll let Prime Minister Modi and the Indians speak to that. Again, it's 1% to 2% at this point in time. It is not, they import 10% from the United States. It is not a violation of any sanctions or anything along those lines. It was a constructive, direct conversation, but I will let them speak for themselves.
And secondly, the president said he wanted to meet Prime Minister Modi in Tokyo on or about May 24th. What else can you tell us about this trip?
The president is looking forward to going to Asia at some point, but I don't have any more details at this point in time. Clearly he's excited since he talked about it today.
And lastly, any details about this announcement tomorrow in Iowa? Is it related to ethanol?
I don't have any more details at this point in time. As you all know, we are taking a range of steps to reduce the price of gas, to move us toward a long-term, more clean energy economy, but I expect we'll have more of a preview for you later today. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Back to the conversation with Modi. Did the president urge Modi to speak out more forcefully against the Russian invasion?
Well, we have seen the Indians do exactly that more recently, as they did as it relates to the horrific photos that we saw around Busha. We've seen them take steps to provide humanitarian assistance and a range of assistance, but it is something we always encourage leaders to do, to speak out, to be vocal, to ensure they're on the right side of history. But this was a constructive call. It was a productive call. It's a relationship that is vitally important to the United States and to the president. I would not see it as an adversarial call.
And then I understand you want to let the Indians speak for themselves, but was the president seeking a promise from Modi that he wouldn't look to increase oil purchases from Russia?
Well, we are, the president both conveyed that we are here to help them diversify their means of importing oil. Again, the imports from the United States are already significant, or much bigger than the imports that they get from Russia. And we, of course, the president conveyed very clearly that it is not in their interest to increase that. But beyond that, I would let the Indian leaders speak for themselves.
And then
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if, last night Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told 60 Minutes that the Ukrainian military has recordings of conversations between Russian troops talking about committing atrocities that would qualify as war crimes. Wondering if anyone in the U.S. government has been able to listen to these intercepts, or whether the U.S. government has similar intercepts.
Well, I don't have anything to confirm on that front from here, but what I would reiterate is something Jake Sullivan said last week, which is that as we're looking to provide data and information to war crimes investigations, of which there are a range of options currently underway, the OSCE, obviously the ICC, the Ukrainian special prosecutor is also gathering information. We're going to provide any data and information we can, and we're going to encourage other countries to do exactly that. We've already called a range of these actions we've seen war crimes. That is important, but there's also going to be an investigative step where all of this will be fed into. That can also take some time.
If this ended up at The Hague, is that something that the White House would support?
We're not going to prejudge which format or forum that it can take. There are a range of different options that history has utilized, whether it's the ICC or the OSCE, and basically an international fora is probably the appropriate forum, but we're not going to predetermine what that looks like. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Does the U.S. intend to return its diplomatic presence to Kyiv?
That is, of course, our objective over the course of time, but we're going to have to assess when it's the right time to do exactly that.
Is it considering moving back into Ukraine, potentially to Lviv, sooner rather than later?
I don't have a prediction of that at this point. Obviously, it's in our interest to have a diplomatic presence on the ground, but that is an assessment made by the State Department, made through the prism of security considerations, and sometimes it's a smaller presence that gets larger, but they are really the appropriate entity to speak to that.
Is there any concern that if the U.S. does not get its diplomatic presence back sooner, that it'll appear that we're leading from behind, as you've got the European Union, I believe the Czech Republic, Italy, a lot of countries are coming forward and saying that they're going back to Ukraine, and the U.S. hasn't done it yet?
I would say that the most important thing the United States has done and continues to do is lead the entire global coalition in standing up against Russia and ensuring we are providing military security assistance, expediting that, tapping into not only our own resources, but the resources of countries around the world, and leading the world in a package of economic sanctions that has had a crippling impact on the Russian economy. Those are the most important factors.
Has the president asked to go to Ukraine?
I'm not going to get into private conversations. What I will tell you is we're not currently planning a trip by the President of the United States to Ukraine. What is most important to the Ukrainian leadership is that we are expediting weapons and getting them the assistance and security systems they need, and that is what our focus is on.
And who decides if the president goes to Ukraine or not?
In what way?
He had said when he was in Poland that he expressed interest in going to Ukraine, but they wouldn't let me. So I'm wondering who
I'm not
advises-
going to get into private considerations internally on that front.
Okay, and then on Title 42, you said over the weekend that the administration agrees more needs to be done, the immigration system is broken. This was in response to a question about
Sure.
Democrats who don't want to lift it right now. You invited Republicans to work with the White House to get something done on immigration, but has the White House actually reached out to any Republicans to try to move this forward recently?
It has been a long-standing open invitation. Any Republican who wants to work with us on immigration reform, you're invited. Let's have a conversation. We have not seen an expression of that interest across the board.
So you're wanting Republicans to go to you. The White House is not reaching out then to any.
We have conversations with Democrats and Republicans all the time, Jackie, but I think it's clear what we're seeing from Republicans is an effort to politicize this and not fix what we all recognize as an outdated and broken system.
One last question. You said on Friday that the vice president was masked indoors all day, but the White House tweeted a video showing her standing over the president without a mask on. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, I would say that the vice president and the president and all of us abide by what the CDC protocols are. It was an emotional day. It was a historic day. And there were moments when she was not wearing a mask inside, including in a photo, but she was wearing it 99.9% of the time. I would note the president and the vice president have both tested negative in the last 24 hours. And, we have felt and made the decision it's important to share with all of you when there are close contacts. That's exactly what we did. Why it's of interest to the public, I think, is, and you guys can agree or disagree with me, is because the four principles, the public has a right to know and an interest in knowing when the four principles have exposure or close contact exposure to any individuals who have COVID. The vice president is now 5 days post-exposure. She tested negative. Oh, go ahead. Do it. Oh, sorry. I'll go to Caitlin. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry, I jumped around. I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
Speaking of India's response to Russia's invasion, they have abstained from several votes at the United Nations condemning the invasion, suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council. Did President Biden raise that during their call today?
I don't have any more details beyond what was raised or briefed out in the background call. Obviously, the call concluded. We just did a briefing call. I don't have any more details beyond that.
So you can't say if President Biden asked them to condemn the invasion?
They have condemned the recent horrific atrocities we saw in Busha, and certainly, as we see more, we expect them to do exactly that as well.
What does the U.S. assess this new Russian general overseeing the invasion will mean for it going forward?
Well, I would say our view is that even a changeover in personnel or leadership at the top is not going to erase the fact that this is a strategic a failure for Russia. What we should all be aware of, and we are certainly aware of, is this is a general who was already responsible for overseeing atrocities in Syria, and that we would expect that it would be a continuation of the type of atrocities we've already seen take place in Ukraine. But again, they have not. It is not gone as President Putin has planned, and we don't expect a change in personnel would change that.
Are you concerned it could get worse?
Well, I think, Caitlin, separate from any change of leadership at the top, what we have seen or we expect is as they have coalesced their resources and all of the resources that they have into most of them, I should say, into eastern Ukraine, we certainly expect that they will seek to surround and overwhelm Ukrainian forces in that part of the country. We expect Russia will continue to launch air and missile strikes across the rest of the country to cause military and economic damage. And we expect this stage of the conflict could last a long time, and we should have no illusions that Russia is going to adjust their tactics and make them less brutal. And certainly changes in leadership reflect a continuation of the type of atrocities we've seen, or the type of approach that we've seen and we've also predicted from the beginning.
And just to follow on Jackie's question, what is the threshold for reopening the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv?
I'd point you to the State Department if they have any more specifics they want to outline publicly. Obviously, we want to have a diplomatic presence on the ground. That's always going to be our objective. Go ahead. Oh, Kelly, go ahead.
It's been years since there's been a confirmed ATF director,
Yeah.
and what do you think will be different now with this new nomination the president's putting forward? And do you think the absence of that kind of leadership has had any part in the increase in gun violence the country has seen?
Well, it's hard for me to make a conclusion, or us to make a conclusion on that from here. But what we know is that having confirmed leadership, leading any agency, including one as important as the ATF, always is going to make the systems, the processes, the ability to get policy making done more efficient and effective. And there's no question it's a net positive to have someone confirmed to lead ATF. I would say that. Steve, who is our nominee or announced a nominee, is a highly qualified candidate with decades of law enforcement experience, including through partnerships with the ATF to prosecute complex cases and take down violent criminal gangs. He's received bipartisan support from law enforcement leaders. He was confirmed unanimously when he was nominated to serve as a federal prosecutor. And our view is that if Republicans are about getting tough on crime, as we are, and keeping our communities safe, they should support a career prosecutor like Steve Dettelbach, who can make ATF more effective in getting guns off our streets and stopping criminals. And it's in all of our interests to have a confirmed nominee, and we think he is eminently qualified to do exactly that.
And just to follow on the issue of the vice president and the masking, a couple of times you've cited emotional day, important role she was playing. You're not saying that those things are reasons to not follow CDC guidance?
Absolutely not, and I appreciate your question on that. What I was conveying is that while she has worn a mask, as is protocol, and as is our expectation of everyone from the vice president, the president, all of us on down, if you have a close contact, that there was a photo, as Jackie said, and there are moments when she was human, and she didn't have a fat mask on in a photo, but she has worn the mask, and certainly that is what we want to convey to the American people.
Is it because of the photo, because it's an important day and the photo will live for decades, that we all understand? I mean, I'm wearing a mask today. I don't always wear a mask.
Yeah.
Is that the reason?
I think it was a decision made in the moment, but it doesn't mean that we don't all try to be model citizens here and abide by what the CDC protocols are and requirements. And I conveyed and wanted to reiterate that she did test negative, in case those of you had not seen that, because she now is at that 5-day past the close contact. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, Jen? Thank you. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was deposed this weekend following a no-confidence vote in Parliament. What is the administration's reaction to those developments, and does President Biden have any plans to speak with the country's new Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif?
So we support the peaceful upholding of constitutional and democratic principles. We don't support one political party over another, and we certainly support the principles of rule of law and equal justice under the law. We value our longstanding cooperation with Pakistan, have always viewed a prosperous and democratic Pakistan as critical to U.S. interests. That remains unchanged, regardless of who leadership is. In terms of a future call, I don't have anything to predict at this point in time. Obviously, we stay in close touch with them at a range of levels.
One more question on the president's call with Prime Minister Modi. Was India's acquisition of the S-400 missile defense system from Russia a topic of discussion? And do you have any updates on whether the U.S. would impose sanctions that would be triggered under CAATSA or issue a waiver should India go through with that purchase?
Yeah, I don't have an update, as I said, kind of to an earlier question on the CAATSA waiver that would be required. I don't have an update at this point in time. I can see if there's more to report out to you for the end of the day. Go ahead.
Tomorrow is CPI day. It's probably obviously going to capture the start of the war and pretty significant spikes in energy. Can you give us a sense of what you're expecting and what, if any, change this will make for what talks may or may not be going on with the Hill on what pieces that may or may not be passed of a bill that may or may not have a name? I don't know.
Sounds very hypothetical and hopeful. Okay.
How high do you expect these numbers to be?
Sure.
Is there
No.
any impact on the strategy to pass what you believe to be inflation cooling measures in the medium term?
I understand your question. So because of the actions we've taken to address the Putin price hike, we are in a better place than we were last month. But we expect March CPI headline inflation to be extraordinarily elevated due to Putin's price hike. And we expect a large difference between core and headline inflation, reflecting the global disruptions in energy and food markets. So core inflation doesn't include energy and food prices. Headline inflation does. And of course, we know that core inflation, energy, the impact of energy, of course, on oil prices, gas prices, we expect that to continue to reflect what we've seen the increases be over the course of this invasion. And just as an example, since since President Putin's military buildup accelerated in January, average gas prices are up more than 80 cents. Most of the increase occurred in the month of March, and at times gas prices were more than $1 above pre-invasion level. So that roughly 25% increase in gas prices will drive tomorrow's inflation reading. And certainly it's not a surprise to us, but we certainly think it will be reflected. And in March, again, to give you a point of comparison, the average cost of a barrel of oil was around $110. That's compared to about $75 at the beginning of the year. So we expect this to all be reflected as we look at the data tomorrow. I will say that anytime there is heightened monthly data or inflation reporting or numbers, it is a reminder to us, to our allies on the Hill, and hopefully to many of the American people that we need to do more to reduce costs for the American people. We have, of course, legislation that could do exactly that, cut the cost of child care, of health care, of elder care. These all have enormous impacts on people's budgets, on when they're doing those calculations at their kitchen table, and certainly this data will be a reminder of the need to do something and take additional steps.
The President signed the PNTR bill on Friday.
Yes.
Do you have anything to share on next steps for that? In other words, how quickly would tariffs on Russian goods change across the
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me see if I can get you a more how quickly it would be implemented. When they would see the tariffs, as you're asking?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
And finally, the announcement this afternoon on guns, of course, backdrop to this is a lot of cities are seeing significant instances of gun crime or violent crime more generally. Can you give us an update of where the administration stands on a push for a police reform package to pass through Congress? Are those talks ongoing at all? Or is the calculus of the sort of escalation in crime has made it even more difficult to pass a police reform package right now?
Well, I would say first on gun violence, which we do recognize as an enormous problem and, of course, a driver of what we've seen as the rising rates of crime across the country for some time. We are going to continue to call on Congress to do more. We're not going to wait while lives are being lost and when more reforms need to be put in place. So I think there's kind of two components here. There's obviously police reform. There were bipartisan conversations. We sort of paused on our review of an executive order for that period of time out of respect for that process. Obviously, that's not a process that is rapidly moving forward. We're continuing to review and have every intention of the president signing an executive order on police reform. I would note that we have also taken steps from the Department of Justice to ban chokeholds and take other steps that we have the capacity to do from the federal government. But in order to make reforms impactful over the long term and more expansive, we need legislation. On guns, we have also taken steps. The president has done more to fight gun violence and keep our communities safe than any president in history in his first year in office. This is obviously an issue that is close to his heart, something he's passionate about and has been for decades. And choking off the supply of guns being used in crimes, including by cracking down on gun traffickers and firearms dealers who are selling guns illegally, is one of the steps we've taken. But also we've taken steps to put more cops on the beat, investing in proven community-based programs to make our streets safer, doing all of this to prop up while also supporting reforms, local police, make sure they have the funding they need, while also putting in place, in whatever capacity we have, gun reforms measures, as the president is doing today, to help address some of the rising impacts like ghost guns.
Your assessment.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.